Good morning and welcome to ICCR's webinar on thermal energy networks, decarbonization and just transition accelerator. My name is Pedro Glatz and I'm the new Associate Director for Climate Change and Environmental Justice and the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. ICCR is a coalition of some 300 global faith and values-based institutional investors that work in coalition to engage the world's largest corporations on a broad range of social and environmental issues affecting communities in the US and globally. We feel strongly that justice must be at the heart of societal changes needed to address the climate crisis. A few years ago, we had a webinar on geothermal energy, and today we are pleased to host this new one, which will go deeper into the possibilities inherent in one specific use of this technology, geothermal energy networks. Our panelists will analyze this topic not only from a technical perspective, but also considering the concerns of workers, the needs of communities, and the policy landscape required to incentivize its use. We all know that the global use of renewable energy has grown substantially over the past decade, driven by increasing awareness of the effect of climate change and the urgency of cutting emissions by minimizing the use of fossil fuels. Compared with other energy technologies, geothermal projects have not gained the traction that we can see in the build-out of solar or wind farms. However, we at ICCR are convinced that fostering the use of this technology may be very beneficial as a fossil-free alternative to gas for heating and cooling buildings, reducing the demand for additional electricity production as we work to electrify everything, as we know that we are supposed to do. The technology also offers an equitable path forward for current gas workers. In other words, what we all want, a just transition. We're pleased to have a wonderful lineup of speakers to discuss aspects of this technology and its potential role in a just transition to a net zero carbon future. I want to thank all of our presenters for their willingness to share their perspectives and expertise with us today. All speakers have offered to make themselves available for follow-up questions. So in case you think that you need to follow up a conversation with them, they're really willing to answer those directly. Before I turn over to our first speaker, I want to offer a few housekeeping points, which are really important for the development of this webinar. This one will be recorded, and we will send a follow-up email to everyone with a link to the recording and contact emails for speakers. We will take time at the end of each presentation for a brief moment of Q&A, so please enter your questions in the chat. I will try to ask our presenters the largest amount of questions that we can fill before moving to the next speaker. And now, just to finish this introduction, I want to hand the webinar over to Amy Orr with Boston Common Asset Management, who is one of our members, and she will get us started with an investor's perspective on the energy transition and the role that geothermal can play in decarbonizing our economy. So, Amy?
Great. Thank you, Pedro. That was a great introduction. And my name is Amy Orr. I am a director of shareholder engagement at Boston Common Asset Management. For those of you who don't know, Boston Common is a sustainable, responsible investor with $4.7 billion in assets under management and a long-standing commitment to investing at the intersection of social justice and financial return. We do have investments in utilities companies and find them to be sort of a big part of our thinking around how our communities, our cities can decarbonize over the long term. And some of the utilities that we own operate and service to places like Massachusetts and New York, and places that ultimately need to decarbonize rapidly in order for us to meet the long-term goals that we have all committed to. And network geothermal is such a compelling technology, as Pedro already pointed out. You know, we're finding in our engagements that it is very attractive from a sort of proven standpoint to not only decarbonize, but also to do so in a way that's cognizant of, you know, the energy burdened communities, environmental justice concerns, and really thinking about sort of how to electrify places that are diverse, both socioeconomically as well as ethnically, and language barriers and whatnot. And so have found some compelling engagement opportunities with utilities in this space. But we have a lot of work to do. And so many of my, fellow investors on the line will confess that these engagements are, have not been linear. They have not been always advancing at the pace that we really want and need them to. And so some engagement priorities that we're focusing on, I'll just run through a couple. Pedro already mentioned sort of the compelling thesis around jobs and transition of workforce, but we will continue to push utilities companies to press on, how they're defining quality jobs in this transition from gas workers to theoretically, pipes that are equipped for networked geothermal. And we will really ask for better transparency and disclosure around contract workers, really to encourage not a race to the bottom, but a race to higher quality jobs with collective bargaining rights, high wages, all of those good things that we will ask companies to achieve as part of a just transition for not only communities, but also workers. Secondly, CapEx alignment is going to be very important, an important part of our engagement, and sort of keeping companies accountable to not only these small pilot projects, which everyone loves to talk about, but what is the scale of those pilots, and is it a scale that is appropriate to sort of meet our ambitious needs to decarbonize our communities? And then last, but definitely not least, environmental justice and equity access, or energy access, has been a big topic of ICCR's working groups, where we've had multi-stakeholder engagements convened, and we very much participate in those to basically underscore, the interest and need to consider technologies that are appropriately, taking physical space that is in direct service to the community. And network geothermal, we think, is quite compelling. You don't need sort of the large transmission lines and power substations that are in service to other communities in this technology. And so we find it quite compelling. And we'll continue to encourage companies to pilot projects that are focusing on energy burdened communities, and as well as sort of just technological advancement at large. So those are three highlights from our standpoint. Back to you, Pedro.
Thank you so much, Amy, and those great remarks to introduce this really great conversation that is just starting now. We already both mentioned a bit, one few of the great things that we think that we know about geothermal. But now we're gonna go and move to the experts, to the people that are actually performing this work, right? So first, I'm gonna give the floor to Audrey. Audrey Schulman is the co-founder and co-executive director on the home energy efficiency team, HEAT. And yeah, she was, so Audrey, please go ahead.
Okay, hopefully you're seeing my screen now and can hear me.
Yes.
There you go. So HEAT's a nonprofit in Massachusetts. We are funded by foundations, private donors, and the government sometimes. We don't take funding from industry, whether gas or heat pumps or whatever, and that's so that all of you can continue to trust us and assume that we are not in any way, only going on pushing one side or another. So a few years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, the local gas utility came down my street and ripped up the street and replaced all the gas infrastructure under the ground because it's leak prone. And they replaced all the services and, did a fair amount of disruption without asking anybody if they actually, who was already on gas, if they did want this new infrastructure. And part of the problem with this is that this new infrastructure will last 50 to 100 years. Into the future. And all gas customers of this utility will have to continue to pay for this infrastructure through amortization over decades, right? And meanwhile, we have in Massachusetts a net zero emissions mandate such that, by 2050. So this infrastructure, this fossil fuel infrastructure, is likely to have to be paid for by our kids and our grandkids, but it's not likely to be able to be used by them. which seems bad to me. And at the same time that this is happening, heat pumps are becoming much more in favor now. Their sales are, they're more popular than gas furnaces. So, and that's partly because they provide, heating and cooling, and Lord knows these days we need a lot more cooling. So as customers, which has already happened on my street, 2 of the people on my street have already gotten off of the gas system since the point it was replaced. As those gas customers get off the gas system, moving instead towards air source heat pumps, that gas system is still a fixed size with fixed costs. So those costs have gotten no cheaper, right? So the remaining customers are shouldering a greater and greater percentage over time of that fixed infrastructure costs. At some point, there's going to be an inflection point hit where heating with air source heat pumps will become less expensive than heating with gas. At that point, there's going to be a large defection of customers, and the only people remaining on that gas infrastructure are likely to be those who cannot afford a new heating system, low income, and those who are not able to switch, meaning renters. As that happens, the gas utilities will probably not be able to afford all of the workers that they need to maintain the system in a safe way. So this, looking forward into stranded assets this way is not an equitable transition, and it's not probably going to be a safe one. So since heat realizes this back in 2017, we came up with the idea of networked geothermal, which is also known as thermal energy networks, TENS, ambient temperature loops, all sorts of things. We do have to stabilize the vocab at some point. But basically, it's a network of ground source heat pumps installed in the right-of-way of the street where the gas utilities normally install their infrastructure. There's just water in the pipes, and it's maintained at an ambient temperature somewhere between 40 and 90 degrees, depending on the season. And it's just one pipe. Inside of each building, there's heat pumps that pull off the heating or cooling that building needs. Not everybody on the street has to be at the same temperature, right? And the utility is responsible for thermally managing that temperature over time and space. Utilities are perfect to do this because they get their profit through capital expenditures, and this is a big capital expenditure. They have the financing, they have the customers, they have the right-of-way of the street, and they know how to pump thermal energy through the ground. And right now, many of them in states with decarbonization mandates are facing an existential, death, basically. So the great thing about this system is it offers a variety of benefits beyond that of ground source heat pumps, which are, after all, one of the most efficient ways of getting your heating and cooling. If you network those ground source heat pumps together, then let's say this building here is an office, right? It's going to have a lot more heat being generated inside of the building from all those computers and servers. So it's going to be pulling more cooling off of that shared loop of water and returning the water hotter than before. Buildings down the street can then use that heating. The second way it's more efficient is that during the summer, you can store heat in the ground, in the bedrock, until it's needed in the winter. And at that point, pull it out to use it in your buildings. The outcomes of this are that it would be safer, of course, because there would be no gas in the pipes. There's nothing explosive in the pipes, it's just water. Secondly, the system is the most efficient system I know of, and I think anybody knows of. This is a case study that was done by Accelerator on Colorado Mesa University using their energy bills. They found that there was a COP of 5.7. And so, like, to explain that, a gas boiler, it's less than 100% efficient, right? Because there's always a little bit of heat going up the chimney. It's burning something, some heat goes up the chimney. Heat pumps instead move local temperature from one place to the other, the same as your fridge or an air conditioner does, that except for it can go one way or another, so it can move to heat in or out of your building. And because it moves heat rather than creates it, it's more efficient. So an air source heat pump is, for every 1 unit of energy you put in, it can move 2 units or 3 units of energy, depending on where it is. This system, for every 1 unit of energy you put in, overall, it can move 5.7 units of energy, which is just extraordinarily efficient. And you'll see also during the winter, it had an even higher COP of 8.9 units of energy moving in or out of the building, because that thermal storage in the ground, they were pulling out the heat during the winter. It's also more affordable, or will be, it's predicted to be more affordable by this applied economics clinic brief in Massachusetts. And that's because, but when you pay your gas bill, about 50% of it is just paying for the fuel. So with this system, because it is so extraordinarily efficient, there would be almost no fuel needed, right? So that 50% is mostly gone away. And if you're amortizing it or in the conventional way that gas utilities do, all you're paying for is operations and maintenance and that installation. So that's the reason behind this bill. And as John Murphy will describe later, this is extraordinarily friendly to workforce. The current gas workers can transition because the pipes are exactly the same. The only difference is the stripe on the side of them. The emissions would be 60% below current levels immediately in comparison to a building connected to gas. And those emissions, as our electric grid moves to sourcing its energy from more and more renewables, will decrease over time. This system is good in cold. There's an installation in Toronto, and it's great in heat too. There's an large installation in Whisper Valley outside of Austin in Texas. There are 2 current installations going in Massachusetts, one an Eversource installation and one in National Grid is doing in Lowell. And both of these are, I'm trying to think of how to explain, several hundred tons. So in other words, between 100 and more homes in comparison to homes, but there are businesses also connected because you always want to have that heating and cooling mixed energy use. We have a research team studying these first few installations that's got 2 national labs and many others involved. And that's so that we can, again, create trust across all. We're going to have an open data bank, normalized data, so anybody can look at it. There'll be best practices. There'll be an optimization model so that the design gets more and more efficient going forward. And there'll be a lot of predictions of the scaled up impacts spread across the entire, both academic system and hopefully across the utilities and all other stakeholders so that we can all learn and move forward the fastest way possible. My hope is, and Ania and Kai and John will talk about this in much greater detail, is that soon when the utilities dig in to your street, they will not be installing a system that might end up with stranded assets, but instead a system that your kids and your grandkids can continue to use to bring them safer, clean, renewable, affordable energy, and to transition in the way that we need to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Audrey, for that great overview. It was a really good first idea of what are we gonna be talking today about. And now I'm gonna pass the floor to Kai Palmer-Dunning, who is also at HEAT. He's gonna focus, he's the director of Equitable Building Transition, and he's gonna go much deeper into the equality, justice part of this equation, like how is actually geothermal gonna provide us with a more just energy system. So Kai, please.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Pedro. You can go to the next slide. So as we kind of start this conversation around how to build in equity into the system, I think we just want to kind of set a foundation. I think we all around air source and ground source heat pumps. I think we all know that they the efficiency and energy cost savings that can be realized. But if we're looking at this from an equitable standpoint, there still is the upfront cost issues with both of these technologies. With air source heat pumps, even though the cost is coming down, is still homeowners and property owners are still paying $2,000 to $10,000 to get air source heat pumps installed. And then while more energy efficient than air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps are still very expensive, ranging from $10,000 to $25,000. And there are incentives that states and the federal government are offering through programs and funding opportunities like the Infrastructure Reduction Act. But these technologies are still very expensive, and the upfront costs are a barrier for many families. Next slide. As Audrey mentioned, in order to kind of address this upfront cost and this upfront cost, it's really important for us to kind of look at a phased transition. If we're kind of just electrifying house by house, building by building, there's many issues that come into play. Like, who will be paying for the gas infrastructure that's still on the grid? How will we be managing the loads as electric loads as more and more buildings electrify? If we're not doing that in a thoughtful and phased manner. And so, as Audrey mentioned, network geothermal is a great way to do that, not only from a energy standpoint, but also from an equity standpoint. By doing kind of a zonal transition, a zonal electrification transition, we're able to kind of strategically plan out on a block by block, city by city basis about how we're transitioning and electrifying. And by building out a network geothermal system, former gas customers are able to stay under the same utility at a formal geothermal rate, so that the customers that are on the gas rate and on the geothermal rate are able to both pay for the utility in an affordable way. And you're also able to add customers block by block, so that you're not leaving customers off the system as it transitions over time. Next slide. But in order to do all that and to electrify, to get customers onto network geothermal, it's really important that utilities and states understand that most of our buildings will need to be weatherized and electrified in order to do that. And many utility programs have utility programs that do this, where they're able to weatherize buildings through air sealing, insulation, window replacement, new appliances in the form of switching out gas stoves for induction, Energy Star appliances, installing renewable energy like rooftop solar, switching out HVAC systems, putting in heat pumps, and then EV charging. That's another. So it's really important to have these types of programs to supplement the transition, so that homeowners and property owners and renters are able to weatherize and electrify their buildings in order to prepare for a transition to heat pumps and a future network geothermal system. Next slide. However, there are a number of barriers that prevent low-income communities, EJ communities, and communities of color from accessing these benefits. For instance, in the example of renters, there is a split incentive dilemma, where the property owner or building owner pays the upfront cost for the retrofit, but the renter is the one who benefits from the retrofit by paying lower on their utility bills, especially if for property owners that don't live in the home, they're absentee landlords or absentee property owners. They have no direct benefit from the energy and retrofits that they're doing to the buildings otherwise, and besides potential increases in the property value. So it's really important to figure out how do we incentivize building owners to make upgrades to their buildings at a cost, a potential upfront cost that they don't benefit from directly through energy cost savings. Next slide. And then there are also deferred maintenance barriers, specifically in low-income EJ communities. Their properties are very old. There's maintenance that hasn't been done over a number of years, and this creates another barrier for electrifying and weatherizing buildings. First, there's could be issues of knob and tube wiring, which was often present in buildings built before the 1930s. And all of this knob and tube wiring has to be removed before any types of electrical upgrades or weatherization can be done. Low electric capacity is also another huge issue. Buildings built before 1950 typically were built with 60 amps, which is not very much electricity from not much electric capacity compared to today. And that was increased to 100 amps in the 1960s. However, modern buildings that run primarily on electricity, that have heat pumps, that have many other plug loads require around 200 amps, which a lot of older buildings don't have. And so all of this has to be taken into account as you're electrifying buildings to upgrade the electric capacity to make them prepared for electrification by installing heat pumps. Combustion safety is also an issue. Older buildings are often improperly vented. They're improperly vented with older furnaces and boilers that have spillage into the home. And so, as you're weatherizing a building, air sealing and putting in insulation, if you don't address this upfront barrier, it can cause dangerous indoor health issues and air quality issues with carbon monoxide and other fumes that aren't able to ventilate out of the home because of the air sealing that's done. Finally, moisture infiltration. This problem is caused by leaky roofs, pipes, and poor ventilation. And it's really important to address these issues first. It's similar to combustion safety, that if you're putting in insulation, putting in air sealing, and you're not addressing the mold and moisture infiltration issues, this can lead to mold growth and then poor air quality issues, which can exacerbate health disparities that already exist in these communities, like asthma and other respiratory illnesses. Next slide. However, there are opportunities to address these issues for utilities. First, in the case of the split incentive issue, a really good program that can help alleviate this issue is tariffed on-bill programs. These programs enable a utility to pay for the cost-effective energy efficiency or other clean energy upgrades at a customer's home. The utility recovers those costs through a fixed site-specific charge on the customer's monthly bill that is less than the estimated savings for the energy bill reduction. And there's no required upfront cost to the customer, and the cost recovery is associated with the meter rather than the individual. And this is really important because as over a 1 or 2 or 3 year basis, as renters are switched out, they're not taking that cost with them. That cost of the upgrade stays attached to the meter, so that renters can leave and new renters can come in, and they're still paying for the paying down the cost of that upgrade that was made to the home. An example of this is the pay as you save system that was developed by Slipstream. It incorporates consumer protections, such as requiring that buildings and the associated monthly charge must not create new debt for the participant, and that the upgrade may not be repossessed. It's being used in a number of utilities around the country, like the Washita Electric Cooperative in Arkansas, which that program was started in 2016, and then the investor-owned utility Amer in Missouri, which started in 2021. So these types of programs that are trying to address that split incentive issues are being piloted and used around the country. So it's really important for utilities to figure out ways to make transition and electrification equitable and feasible for renters and landlords. Another opportunity is an upfront rebate or direct discount covered by a bill charge. So for instance, a small monthly energy efficiency charge based on kilowatt hour usage per month. So it's a couple of cents per kilowatt hour that can fund more comprehensive electrification and weatherization incentives that remove the upfront cost barriers for low to moderate income programs. So by charging this a little amount per kilowatt hour on a bill, you're able to use that fund to go farther in terms of addressing the upfront cost issues for upfront cost and barrier issues for low income and EJ communities. Next slide. And so it's really important to when we're thinking about transitioning to network geothermal to include the community in this process. So oftentimes in EJ communities, EJ communities are often used as sacrifice zones for infrastructure. So things like substations, power plants, and other types of utility infrastructure, unfortunately, often cited in environmental justice communities. And so it's really important to include them in the conversation really early on for any types of infrastructure that might have impacted the community. And they're very sensitive of these siting issues, and so again, it's important to engage them. And we saw this play out in East Boston, which is a low-income community in the Boston area, over a year-long fight over a substation that was sited there. That the community felt that they didn't have a say in deciding where it would go and how and why it was being built out. And so there was a year-long fight over that substation. That was that Eversource was developing there. So it's really important to kind of get the right people in the room from the start, and that includes facilitating working groups, us having sensing conversations one-on-one with individuals to kind of identify what the unique perspectives are. It's about proactively engaging communities that are most impacted by the decisions that utilities and other and municipalities are making, and it's about identifying gaps so as you're having these conversations, figuring out who's missing and why they might be missing. Are you not centering language justice? Are you scheduling meetings at times when most residents would be at work? Being able to figure out what are the barriers that are preventing people from engaging with the process is really important. It's just as important as creating an equitable process for engagement in the first place. And then another important piece is creating a level playing field for collaboration. So oftentimes when municipalities and utilities and other decision makers are bringing groups together, they don't realize that there's often an information asymmetry. They might be coming to a conversation with way more information than a community member or resident or community-based organization might have. And so it's really hard to create effective collaboration and communication between the groups if there isn't a level of understanding around what is the base level of information that's needed in order to engage with this process. So it's really important to make sure the community has the education and information that's needed in order to make them comfortable with engaging in the process. Next slide. And so a really good case study. Audrey kind of mentioned a little bit about the pilot projects going on in Framingham and Lowell. So the Eversource pilot that's going on in Framingham used a really great community engagement strategy. They were able to engage with many different stakeholder groups: the municipality, the energy office, residents directly, businesses that were eventually added to the loop and that were engaged with, schools, and different important community groups in Framingham as well. And they were able to use many different community engagement strategies. First, just having municipal briefings, direct mailings with the community, on-site and virtual meetings to both address the availability and capacity of residents to attend in person and virtual meetings, door-to-door outreach, and hosting office hours, and having community events. And two really good examples of this are they hosted an event at a middle school in Framingham, which was a one-day program to encourage girls to explore the areas of engineering to address the gender gap in the STEM program. And so that was a really great way for them to engage directly with the community about a topic very, very related to the geothermal pilot that they were building out, and build trust and communication and collaboration with the community through this. They're also able to use their geothermal community partner to host weekly office hours under a tent that was located near the pilot site, that residents were able to stop by and ask questions throughout the process, so they never felt like things were happening that they weren't aware of. So they had the opportunity to really engage directly with the process by having these by having a space where they could go to ask questions. I mean, as a result of this really effective community engagement strategy, the pilot was able to recruit 37 buildings, 32 residential and 5 commercial, with a total of 140 customers, and about 80% of the residents in the pilot area opted into the pilot program, which is a really great conversion rate. And there was interest from residents outside of the pilot area for potential future growth of the pilot and being part of that future growth in the pilot. So this, I think, is a really great example of how effective community engagement can really bring in residents in on the process and have really beneficial outcomes. And so this is an example of a community engagement strategy of a project that was already happening. But as we're kind of thinking about building out network geothermal and other communities, it's really important to involve the community in that process from the very start. So I hope that was a good overview of community engagement. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Kai, for that great, amazing presentation, giving us some deeper and more details about the way that these processes are happening across many regions, many cities, many neighborhoods. And now I want to give the opportunity to John Murphy who is an international representative for the United Association of Plumbers, Pipe Fitters, and Sprinkler Fitters in New York. He's gonna be providing us with the perspective of the workers who are dealing with this project on the ground. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hear from you, John. And I will just wanted to remember everyone that if in case you have any questions, you can start writing them into our chat, and I will be putting them here into the floor to our panelists to try to answer them. So yeah, please, John.
Thank you, Pedro. Good afternoon, everyone. As Pedro mentioned, my name is John Murphy, and I'm an international representative with the United Association of Plumbers, Pipe Fitters, and Sprinkler Fitters in the United States and Canada. I'm excited to be with you today as we collaborate on the decarbonization of our building stock as we know it today. I'm also honored to be with such a talented and dedicated panel who readily accepts the challenges we face, yet continues to put forth real solutions that are good for the environment, good for the ratepayers, and good for the workers in the industry. They truly practice what they preach. As we forge a path to decarbonization, it's critical that workers in the fossil fuel industry are not left behind. We continue to hear the phrase, just transition. Where is the transition for thousands of plumbers, pipe fitters, or utility workers who have been installing and maintaining fossil fuel systems her whole career? The challenge for many in my industry was to change the narrative from renewable to clean, from electrification to decarbonization. A few years ago, in my endless search for answers, I came upon a great article about a design to decarbonize the Empire State Plaza in Albany using energy transfer from geothermal boreholes, wastewater, and even the Hudson River. It's a brilliant design. I was able to track down the designer and co-recipient of the Constellation Prize, Jay Egg. Jay explained very clearly the tremendous potential and high efficiency of thermal energy networks. It was from that day forward that this plumber and gas fitter recognized there was a path forward, one that would utilize the skills and training of our present and future workforce while decarbonizing buildings throughout the nation. The meetings with the team at EggGeo preceded a growing collaboration with Lisa Dix of the Building Decarbonization Coalition, Jessica Azoulay of A Greener New York, National Grid, and others to pass the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act, or UTENJA, in New York State, that allows utilities to build out utility-scale thermal energy networks. Key components of the law mandate prevailing wage, registered apprenticeship, and pre-apprenticeship programs, as well as 40% of the benefits steered to underserved communities most impacted by climate change. Outside of our buildings, we need to massively scale emissions-free thermal energy networks, or TENS, over the next 2 decades. Thermal energy networks will scale building decarbonization, reduce costs for customers, and will not impact the electric grid because these networks don't put additional load on the grid. Decreasing the load on the grid is critical as we continue to see power plant closures and increased electrification. In order to decarbonize our communities while training the clean energy workforce of tomorrow, it's critical for building trades union training departments to have a pipeline of work or work certainty in order to recruit and train new members. I believe a great model for inclusion is in the New York City Building Trades Council, where up to 40% of every apprenticeship class comes through successful pre-apprenticeship programs, such as Project Pathways that provides opportunities for low-income and justice-involved applicants, helmets to hard hats for our returning veterans, non-traditional employment for women, and the Edward J. Malloy Construction Skills Initiative that recruits from New York City vocational schools. The majority of apprentices that enter through these programs have an industry retention rate of over 80%. These are model programs of inclusion that could be replicated nationwide. In short, thermal energy networks provide the most fundamental and basic solution to decarbonizing our communities, creating jobs that are transferable, including workers that build out fossil fuel networks and utility workers that maintain the gas grid, while reducing energy bills, increasing health and safety of our communities, and providing equitable energy solutions. I heard one of our previous speakers talk about the solar industry. Unfortunately, the solar industry is more about job displacement as it applies to power generation, where the majority of solar installers typically make about 70% less of what a building trades member makes on a power generating facility. So while there's a space for it, it's not a true transition for any of that workforce. I've heard also some people wonder, how do we build these out in such a massive scale? Can it be done? Well, back in World War II, as a result of oil tankers being sunk by German submarines, the US responded by building out 2,700 miles of pipelines in less than a year. In the 50s and 60s, we built 1.5 million miles of pipelines in just 20 years. If we think big enough, we certainly can do it. But the important thing is consider the transfer of skills for the workforce and to be able to recruit new members in the clean energy workforce of tomorrow. Thank you. I'll be happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, John. That was really inspiring, and getting the chance to see, what's actually happening on the ground. What are the workers seeing, and what are the real potential consequences, good and bad, from the transition and the way that we are experiencing now, right?
Right.
So yeah, it will be great to hear maybe the answers to the questions that are the people attending will be posing. I remember to you that you can start posing your questions in the chat. We'll have some time for Q&A just after our last panelist give her presentation. So Ania Camargo, it's up to you to talk us about, from the Building Decarbonization Coalition, about the national landscape. So please.
Thank you so much, Pedro. I'm Ania Camargo, the Thermal Network Senior Manager at the Building Decarbonization Coalition, also known as the BDC. It's a national nonprofit that, as the name implies, works with building stakeholders to decarbonize buildings. And we do this through policy, research, consumer inspiration, and market transformation. So I'm going to give an overview of what's happening nationally with thermal energy networks, talk about those big picture drivers that have been brought up a little bit during this meeting, and then mostly focus on why gas utilities are key for the thermal energy transition. So next slide. So there are many drivers, but here's the three I'm going to focus on: leak-prone pipe, the electrification movement, and the impact on the electric grid. So next slide. So as this map shows, there is a leaky pipe all across the country. The states that are green have 2,500 to 5,000 miles of leak-prone pipe, and the red ones have more than 7,000 miles of leak-prone pipe. To give you a sense, in Massachusetts, some of our pipes are so old that they were installed in the time of President Lincoln. So we're talking about really old pipes that leak and can be very dangerous and have to be replaced. An economist that reviewed some gas utility filings for Massachusetts found that it would cost about $2 million per mile of pipe replaced, for over $20 billion by 2039. And a similar study found that it would cost in New York almost $3 million a mile for $28 billion. So looking across the country, we have about 80,000 miles of leak-prone pipe, which, if we could say that's terrible, but we could also say it's an incredible opportunity to, instead of spending our money on replacing gas pipe with gas pipe that will last 100 years, to replace it with thermal energy networks. And this kind of data is the data that motivated both Massachusetts and New York to pass legislation that would allow their gas companies to do pilots. So next slide. On the electrification movement, you all know a lot about this, but basically many states, almost all of them, have emissions mandates. There are state building electrification programs going on. New York, the whole state of New York, and over 100 cities and towns have passed ordinances that require or encourage all electric new construction. And then federally, we heard from Kai, there's some state programs and energy efficiency programs everywhere, but the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act that just passed, is going to be giving us incredible federal tax credits, up to 30% for clean energy installation without caps. And then there's some state rebates that will be starting, I think, maybe next year, which are primarily aimed toward low and moderate income households, but that will allow us, would give back, or rather when people buy them, $8,000 for installing air source heat pumps. So next slide, please. So what this means is there's this massive movement. I mean, Audrey showed a slide showing heat pumps, air source heat pumps outpacing gas furnaces. But just last month, 25 governors that make up the US Climate Alliance pledged that they're going to quadruple the number of air source heat pumps by 2030. So from 4.7 million to 20 million. If all of these states transition that energy that is currently gas to electric heat pumps, in addition to the issues that Audrey and Kai brought up about equity, the big and valid concern is whether we will have the electric capacity needed to support this transition. So here's a next slide, please. This is, I don't know if you can see this on the side, it's the amount of electricity and it's in terawatts. And on the bottom is the annual, January through December, and you can see where the summer peak is. So this was a study published by Harvard and Heat, and it shows that the total number of users, and from this perspective, it's about 300 terawatts. And if you go to that we're currently using right now in the summer and the peak, and just a reminder, like the electric grid has to build out to the peak. And so because we don't want blackouts, and so we have to build out the grid to as much electricity as we're going to need. And so next slide, please. This is the researchers who did the study call this the Falcon curve, which shows that it's not just about electrification, it's about how we electrify. So if you look on the left and you look at electric baseboard heat, which is pretty old, nobody's installing that now, but if you have that, it's incredibly inefficient. Audrey mentioned COP, the efficiency is about one unit of energy goes in, 1 unit of energy goes back. You can tell that if we did that, we would have to massively increase the amount of the electric grid, or the capacity in the grid, is particularly in the winters. In January and December, you can see we would be needing so much electricity, we'd have to build all of that. With air source heat pumps, which are great and more efficient, we would still need to double our electric capacity. Ground source heat pumps have a COP of 4, it's a little better. And then, as Audrey said, the thermal energy networks have the highest efficiency rating of any system that we know today. And so if you can look at where it would completely flatten the peak, and we would not have to build out the electric grid the way we would. Clearly, not everything can be a thermal energy network. It's going to be a combination, but it's really important to think about when we electrify, it's not only about electrifying, it's about being efficient and about weatherizing all our homes so that we don't have to build out the electric grid as much. Next slide. So this is why gas utilities are key. For a just and equitable transition, we need a phased, managed, systemic transition from this existing old gas infrastructure to new thermal utilities that sell heat. So on the left is a slide. Actually, Audrey, who's on this presentation, was the one who made this slide. This is Massachusetts and all our leaky pipes that are supposed to be replaced in the next 5 years. So gas utilities are literally the only ones who can safely and systematically decommission the existing gas infrastructure. Otherwise, you'd have all those 30 million air source heat pumps being installed at the same time that you would be maintaining this gas system. As John said, the workforce, there is a major concern about will we have the workforce that we need to transition to green energy. And the gas utilities have the existing labor force and the training systems in place so that we could easily transition from gas to thermal networks. And then both Audrey and Kai touched on the equity piece, and the utilities were made for this reason, which is that they have this enormous upfront cost that then can be shared across all ratepayers and across time over 50, 60 years, so that we could have an affordable transition versus having each person one at a time. It makes it much more expensive. And then finally, it's at the speed and scale that we need. Utilities can install the technology more quickly and bring the cost down because of the economies of scale. So next slide, please. So this shows that utility companies are very interested. You can see the green states there are New York, Massachusetts, and Minnesota have utilities that have proposed pilots to their commissions. And the states in blue are it's the Utility Network Geothermal Coalition. It means that every state in blue has at least one utility that operates in that state. And those blue states are primarily in the exploratory phase. Next slide, please. And why are gas utilities interested? It's a very similar business model. There's a high capital expenditures, and that is how gas utilities make their money, by the interest on the CapEx. It would be year-round revenue, so it would not just be heating, it would also be cooling. There would be no price volatility because it's hyper-local energy. So even if your state doesn't produce, right now, if your state doesn't produce gas, you have to import it, and it's also the price is dependent on what's happening geopolitically. And then obviously safer because it is a closed loop of water. And then finally, the IRA incentive, same as I said before, there's an incentive for house owners. There's also an incentive for investment tax credit for commercial installations. There's a 6% tax base rate, and then up to 30% for projects that meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements and that are of a certain size. Plus, there's also some additional incentives if the equipment is made in the United States. Next slide, please. So for all of this to happen, though, we have to do some change legislation because gas companies are highly regulated and in most states are only allowed to sell gas. So the first step in the process is to pass legislation to enable them to install installation projects or pilots. As you can see here, 4 states, Massachusetts, New York, Minnesota, and Colorado, have passed legislation. 4 states in green filed last year, and several others are considering filing. Those are the states in blue are considering filing this year. Next slide, please. Not surprisingly, each state has tailored their bill to their state and has different provisions in their legislation. But as you can see in this chart, states are learning from each other. Looking at the draft bills that are being filed right now that are not on this list, several will be similar to the Colorado-New York bill, but there are some that have more tailored models. For example, Vermont is also looking at communities and other owners of thermal networks because Vermont's gas territory only covers a small portion of the state. Next slide, please. So the question is, are these in existence? Well, there are actually hundreds of thermal energy networks across the country, including in many college campuses, but there are only a few live installations that have the characteristics of the maximally efficient network geothermal systems that were described by Audrey. And so what this map shows, in the green are current live installations in Colorado, Colorado Mesa University, which was installed in 2008, and it's been really successful. In Utah, also another university, and then in Texas and in Iowa, there are community installations. The one in Texas actually has like 450 homes connected to a geothermal network. And then utility funding installations we touched on. In New York, 11 pilots have been proposed by utilities and are being reviewed or are being reviewed by the Utility Commission. They'll have to refile them by December 15th, but there's 11 that are in process. In Massachusetts, 5 have been approved and 2 are under construction that Audrey talked about. And then the states in orange are where there are site feasibility studies, and that are currently being conducted. 11 of these are federal Department of Energy grants, and several of these will be funded to be installed. And then finally, I just want to point out to New York, I have the list of all the places where the feasibility studies are on the right. NYSERDA has done, I believe, 9 rounds of funding, and they're seeing lots of interest from municipalities and from developers. And then my last slide, please. Oh, I think one more up, keep going up. One more, up. Thank you. Oh, you missed us. There you go. So this is just a collaboration between BDC and HEAT. And these are advocate organizations that it's a coalition, and it includes different advocates that want to promote thermal energy networks in their states. And this is important because usually these are local nonprofits who work with all stakeholder groups, sort of to Kai's point that we have to include everyone. And they're on the ground, and they're essential for moving thoughtful policy forward. So this is a relatively new coalition and is growing, and we're hoping will cover the whole country. Anyway, that is it for me for the national perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya, so much for that presentation, and also for showing that map, because that was exactly the question that I wanted to ask our panelists, and also building from the one that we got from the chat related to what you just said, the provisions created now in some regulations at a state and national level. How do we actually paint that map, all those states, with a color that signs we're thinking about geothermal network? Like, what would be, maybe just go straight to you and see, like, what would you think that we could be doing? And then I can also give the chance to other speakers to talk about, to answer that question.
So, I mean, I think that what I was trying to portray is that there is incredible national interest. I think one of the things that's working against us is that people don't know that much about this technology. I think people know about air source heat pumps, and they maybe know about geothermal, but I can't tell you the number of times that people ask me when I talk about thermal energy networks or network geothermal, if I'm talking about Iceland and, like, you know, hot rock lava heating for electricity versus just thinking about thermal energy. So in terms of like painting that map, I think there's interest almost everywhere. I think the biggest drivers are going to be the gas utilities, and actually also the electric utilities. We're also seeing electric co-ops are interested, and it's all because of thermal energy networks being so much more efficient. And so they are decreasing that peak demand for electricity. So literally there are electric co-ops that are installing geothermal just to reduce peak demand. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's a national issue right now.
No, yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that. And I wanted to pass the mic to John to also give his thoughts about that question. How do we scale this up? And yeah, and while you're answering, I will just check the one that Jacob just wrote. So please.
Sure. So Pedro, again, the first answer was the UTENJA law that we put in place last year to be able to bring it to scale and to raise public awareness of exactly what thermal energy networks are. The group that I collaborated with on the UTENJA law, we've expanded that group to include now called Upgrade New York, which includes the state AFL-CIO and the New York State Building Trades Council. And what we're doing is trying to compel the governor to focus on the 15 highest polluting SUNY state of New York campuses, including prisons, universities. Just the top 15 highest polluters would reduce the carbon emissions on the state portfolio by almost 40% on the state-owned buildings. But again, it's a way of bringing this and raising public awareness to bring it into the mainstream. As Ania mentioned before, people in my industry don't necessarily know what a thermal energy network is, but the potential is just so exciting to think about what we could really achieve, and the fact that the skills are transferable, it provides that transition that I spoke about earlier.
Great. And yeah, just trying to also mention the question that Jacob posed there, and it's something that everybody that it's kind of dealing with geothermal or other transition technologies deal with when we talk with companies, or especially with companies. Like, our current workforce
doesn't have the knowledge to do this, that it's new, that it's required. So we have to hire contractors. What would you answer to that, John? Like, is there a chance to?
It is really, really easy because it's exactly the work that building trades members do. And the training departments in all building trades local unions are all the cost is paid for by the members. There's no public money involved. So hourly contributions go into a training fund. The international, what we do is we provide modules that be able to spread the training throughout the local unions in the United States. But thermal energy networks are typically high density polyethylene, which is prevalent in semiconductor plants that we do today. So again, the work itself, that's the least problematic aspect of this entire vision that we have. The training we can do and the recruitment we can do. There are tens of thousands of workers that are unrepresented doing the work right now, being exploited every single day. So it's important as we pass these laws to make sure that there's labor requirements, prevailing wage, and apprenticeship training and pre-apprenticeship training to be able to bring in workers from underserved communities and train them for tomorrow. It's not just a job, it's a career.
Yeah, definitely. So here, yeah, everybody knows that in case you get that answer back, we don't have our current workforce, you can call John and he will participate and help you
easily
with that.
Very easily.
So Audrey, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in the question was also about drilling. And John, please correct me if I'm wrong on here. There aren't currently that many modules about drilling specifically, and there aren't enough drillers out there to possibly currently to scale the system the way we need to. So we need a lot more drillers.
That's correct, Audrey. We do need a lot more drillers. And the one thing I stay away from, coming from the plumbers and pipe fitters, I stay away from trade line jurisdiction, because typically you'd have operating engineers. There's various crafts that are involved, but there's enough work in these systems for everybody. But what is exciting is the emergence of wastewater energy transfer, where we're taking waste heat from sewage treatments, whether it's sewage treatment plants or whether it's from apartment buildings that have tanks that capture the waste heat before it goes to the sewer, brings it back to the building. All non-combustible to be able to provide domestic hot water for those buildings as well. So there's a race for innovation. We're seeing it. I don't think we've even scratched the surface as of yet.
Yeah, and I'll just and John, tell me if I miss here too, but that if the drillers are contracted by a utility, then it becomes a big enough scale that potentially unions can be involved, and that way we can get potentially, so far as I know, there are no unionized drillers currently. And so that way we could possibly start a new union. Is that true at all?
I don't know about that. I want to be very careful, especially in Massachusetts. What happens in New York, jurisdiction looks different in just different parts of New York. Whether you're in New York City, you could be in Buffalo. But in New York City, I don't think it's an issue about trades that can do the drilling. It's the volume that you're referring to that may be more of a challenge.
Well, thank you, John and Audrey, for that. I don't know, Kai, if you would like to add something to the question about feasibility. How do we scale this? How difficult it is nowadays, maybe to get access to funding. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say communities around the country are really sensitive to utility rates and the changing utility rates. I think we've seen over the last couple of years how much utility rates can fluctuate seasonally. And I think renters, landlords, all types of property owners are really sensitive to that. So I think being able to kind of position transition off of gas or transit into network geothermal as an answer to that fluctuation is really important, specifically because how the technology is situated by being able to tap into the stable temperatures underground to normalize those fluctuations in temperature seasonally. You're able to kind of create kind of a flatter seasonal energy consumption. So I think it's really important to kind of not only educate communities on what network geothermal is, because as Audrey and Nia pointed out, a lot of people think it's like deep rock geo or tapping into the Earth's crust, and that's not what it is. And so being able to kind of demystify that and then kind of position that as an answer to the drastic changes in utility rates that many people have been suffering from is really important.
And Can I once again add just a teeny bit there?
Please.
So I think one of the most important things is how to pay for those retrofits. And to do it for everybody. Just the Eversource and National Grid installations, just about everybody they contacted with the, said yes to being connected to the networked geothermal pilots or demonstration installations, because we know the system works. So long as the retrofits were paid for. So we would be able to go straight down the street and connect everybody for whole streets at a time, whole neighborhoods at a time, likely, if we can pay for the customer retrofits, and it would be equitable that way. So one of the ideas I've been currently thinking about is the idea that since those electric peaks would be so high with any other system as we transition our buildings to electricity, then if we do networked geothermal instead, it's going to radically reduce those electric peaks. That's a lot of money savings for all the customers. And it means the electric utilities do not have to do, substations and electric grid upgrades and many other things. So there's a lot of potential avoided costs. Can we move that avoided costs to the appliances in the customers' buildings? Can we move it towards the general retrofits? And that is something that I hope we gradually learn more about if those numbers work.
Please, John.
Pedro, on Audrey's point, I think what's exciting is Con Edison, one of their proposed pilots is in Mount Vernon, New York, and in one of those underserved communities, mixed use, plenty of rentals as well. And in addition to the infrastructure, I believe their plan is to provide weatherization and to replace the boilers to provide the heat pumps as well to those residences. So that's why it's a pilot, and it is going to involve community buy-in, education. It is going to take time, but I think it's a great pilot.
Great. Thanks, John and Audrey. Now, Stephen just wrote a question, so I'm going to read it. What is potential for thermal energy networks for installing for commercial complexes like shopping centers and office parks? How is TEN complementary for combined heat and power systems that may use natural gas for individual buildings and manufacturing plants or hospitals?
So I can try to answer that. So absolutely. So here's the thing. Utilities are the only ones that are not allowed to do this right now, which is why we have to pass legislation, but everyone else is allowed. So that is why we are seeing developers starting to implement these across the country, and universities everywhere, many corporations. As far as combined heat and power systems, there's also I would say a move, particularly from universities and colleges, that have steam power plants, like that their buildings are being heated by steam, and they are implementing thermal energy networks, not the exact type that Audrey is talking about, because the systems that we're talking about use ambient temperature loops. And so the ambient temperature wouldn't be warm enough to heat up the steam. But what they do is they probably dig deeper, or they have a different methodology in place that allows them to have hot water and cold water, and basically get rid of fossil fuels. Princeton University is an example. They're installing one right now that's going to become 100% fossil fuel free, having been from a fossil fuel plant. And so this is definitely very possible. It wouldn't, with steam, it's harder to use the system we're proposing, but you can have a thermal energy network. Audrey, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I think you did a good job. There are a lot of commercial complexes that already are on the system, and every site will be different on how it's best put in.
Yeah, I think, thank you for that. Christina just wrote again. I think it's the question that it's like popping up in every conversation or every intervention by you, like, how do we go faster? How would you get a higher peak? And in that case, you just mentioned, Anya, kind of irrational, but we need regulation to allow gas utilities now to.
Yes, so we gas utilities could only sell gas, except in New York, that passed a law that says that gas and electric can operate, own, and sell thermal energy. In the other states that it has, I think Colorado has something similar, but in the Massachusetts and Minnesota, it's just a pilot, and they're not yet authorized to sell. We do have a bill in Massachusetts that we're trying to pass that would allow gas utilities to sell thermal energy, but gas utilities are not allowed to do this. So a really important part of the process to scaling is to allow gas utilities to evolve, to transition to think they can still use the same gas pipes and same workers, but instead of processing gas, they will be processing water and thermal heat. And so I think if we can pass legislation everywhere, that could make a huge difference. And then I have a lot of hope because of all of the utility company interest. They are seeing this as a pathway. And so that gives me a lot of hope. Yeah, Christina.
Well, I just wanted to follow up. So I'm thinking about like in areas where you have an electric company and that's separate from the gas utility. In some places, they're combined under the same corporate umbrella. And so you could see customers shifting from one part of the company to another. But when Audrey was talking about avoided costs from not having to build to meet that peak electric demand because we could lower it by putting in network geothermal and reducing the demand on the electric grid. Okay, so there are cost savings there, but the gas utilities can't put those cost savings in their accounts, right? So how do you say that, do you need legislation? Do you need new regulations, something to enable the cost savings from one part of the system to be applied to another part that is not necessarily connected?
Yeah, I think it would have to be very carefully done. In Massachusetts, we had a legal case where the gas utilities wanted to bring in a large transmission gas pipe and charge it partly onto electric ratepayers because they would be using part of that gas. And the Attorney General's office here said that was not allowed, that you couldn't have cross-subsidization. But if the electric utilities were allowed through legislation to use, they could calculate that substation with the electric grid upgrades are going to cost me, $100 million. If I reduce that peak in comparison to air source heat pumps, right? Because as we move to electricity, the peaks go higher. If it's going to save me, $100 million, 10 million, whatever it is, they can calculate that, then that amount could be spent on customer appliances, electric appliances. So it would not be subsidizing the gas utility, or in this case, thermal utilities. Infrastructure would be subsidizing the in-building electric appliances to allow those customers to transition. And this has been done in places like Vermont, Green Mountain Power, where they install like batteries in the customers' buildings, and to be able to shave peak by having basically a virtual power plant in different people's homes. If you add up all the batteries, they can meet peak load that way. So this would be a different way of meeting peak load.
Yeah, and I would just add that it's also going to be about regulation. I mean, I think once the legislation passes, all of the states are going to have to figure out how to regulate how people can charge, and how, do you allow to have like a single rate base? So if you are a gas company, you should be able to probably share the cost across gas and thermal energy networks, and then it would make it, it socializes the transition. But that is all being worked out right now by the regulators that are reviewing this, where there are pilots, and anywhere where there's interest, the regulators are attending. Heat held a really awesome charrette where regulators from 11 states came because this is, hot topic for a utility topic. And so they want to know, like, how are we going to regulate this in a way that's fair and just, and is affordable?
Thanks, Audrey. And Anya, Sister John Slewinski just asked if would every customer in a neighborhood be required to change at the same time? I don't know who could pose that. Yes, Audrey.
So when the gas infrastructure on my street was changed out, nobody asked me if it's okay. That's what utilities do. They deliver one commodity to everybody on the street. Your only choice is to use that or not. So anybody who did not want whatever infrastructure was installed on that street could then go towards fuel oil or air source heat pumps, or, they could go off of that utilities infrastructure and use another utilities infrastructure, or go individual. They could do, a wood fireplace. But that's the way utilities work, is they install critically needed infrastructure and socialize it across all customers to deliver one item.
Yes, Christina.
Yeah, I just have a follow-up question. So what happens if a utility is trying to put in a networked geothermal system, and they've got, say, out of 50 homes, you have 5 people who say, I absolutely don't want geothermal. I don't trust it for whatever reasons they have. Does the gas company have to continue to provide them with gas, since that's been there in the past? And how do they manage 2 systems if that's the case?
So can I answer that? So that's what we're trying to avoid. That is definitely what we don't want. We do not want 2 systems. That would just be I think, the worst of all possible worlds, where becomes dangerous. That's the whole Audrey thing of fewer and fewer people paying for the big. So we have to get there. I think it is a process, though, to get there. So right now, when we're doing these pilots, like Eversource, not everybody agreed to do it. And we're just trying to test the technology. So all of, the gas still exists in the customers that said no. But as we move toward a system where we have to decarbonize, we need to have a plan for gas companies to decommission their existing infrastructure and transition to this. And it's a planned, phased process. And then we have to get to what Audrey said, which is that people can choose to have propane in their homes or use air source heat pumps. They don't have to be on the system. But if as a society we choose both, then we lose.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that I think most people are pretty agnostic to the energy as long as it's affordable and reliable. And so I think in the example of the pilots in Massachusetts, I think as customers who aren't on the system, both see the benefits of being on this system. Their neighbors who are on the system will slowly start to transition. And so I think having those types of pilots is really important to make sure that there aren't people that stay off the system and end up paying more because they're left on a system that's not being supported by the majority of ratepayers.
John.
And perhaps Ania or Audrey can answer this, but most states give very healthy incentives like Mass Save and NYSERDA to be able to switch to a ground source heat pump away from fossil fuel. But I would imagine the IRA funding and the 30% tax credit could come into play as well. So that's a pretty good incentive to think about switching over. And on your point, Kai, people are agnostic. What is it going to cost me? And is it going to be reliable?
Thank you.
Yes, does it deliver cooling as well as heating? And does it improve my indoor air quality? Like, you throw all those things in and people are like, yeah, that sounds great. Go ahead, Ania.
No, I lost my train of thought when I was thinking of how happy you were about the transition to electric houses.
Thanks for that, Audrey and Ania. So yeah, I think we're kind of wrapping up already, finishing this interesting conversation. It has been a wonderful time to get the chance to talk to you, and I just wanted to give you the chance to give some final remarks, some takeaways, and specifically, what would you recommend investors to do, like our members? What's our role here? So that will be interesting too, if you can give some hint of where should we point our efforts. So Audrey, I'm gonna start with you.
So I think in talking to a lot of stakeholders here in Massachusetts, the things that make the utilities and the workers here seem confident that this infrastructure will continue and that it's worth investing a lot of time and money and energy into learning about and installing, et cetera, is if they know it has an annually increasing percentage that will be installed every year. If they can see the future is growing for this infrastructure, that's when they're like, yep, I'm good with this. Let's really examine it. Let's learn about it. Let's make it our expertise. And so I wonder if that might be, if suggesting that and pushing for that might be a way to have everybody understand that this is the way we're heading, so that we can do so in alignment.
So put some numbers in the planning so people can know a bit. So thank you for that. Kai?
Yeah, I'd say twofold. On one hand, continuing to incentivize and build out the programs to retrofit buildings, because I think irregardless of what the system ends up being, I think retrofitting and making sure that our buildings are healthier and safer and more affordable from an energy and indoor air quality standpoint is really important. And then on the utility side, making sure that or engaging the community in those conversations about the transition so that when these projects are starting to build out, there isn't that pushback, there isn't that mistrust, there isn't there's engagement with the community around throughout the process so that these things can be built out smoothly and that community members are able to transition because they see the effectiveness and importance around trust that's being built.
Thank you, Kai. So community engagement, which is essential. So John, please.
And not an answer to your question, Pedro, but a point that I think is very, very important. Besides the social benefit of having workers that receive a fair wage, medical benefits, and a pension, there was a study released just at the end of last year by a company, Independent Project Analysis. And what they did is they were doing an analysis of totally union projects versus mixed use or non-union. In this particular case, it was over a 20-year period in the study of over 1,500 industrial projects. The totally union projects were not only 14% more productive, but 4% less costly. And for those that may think, well, what will this cost? And union wages bring up the cost. It's not the case. And I'll be happy to share that with you if you'd like to share it with anybody.
Please, yeah, please, we'll do because those numbers are the ones that we need when we engage with companies, right? Union jobs are better jobs. It's just a fact.
Right, and less costly, according to this study.
Yeah, the evidence are there. So Ania, just to finish, what are you?
So I feel like you all, if you have an opportunity to meet with gas and electric utilities, I think that is an incredible opportunity to bring up thermal energy networks as an opportunity for a just transition and to ask them where they are on the path of learning about thermal energy networks and what they're planning to do and whether they would be willing to support legislation to allow allow that gas to thermal energy transition. I think starting those conversations would be incredible.
Thank you so much. And I also wanted to give the chance Amy, as the member that also spoke in the introduction, to give your remarks.
Yeah, happy to. I think, well, thank you for all of the feedback from these groups, as we have such a wealth of knowledge on this call. I would say, just to sort of underscore some of the questions that were asked already around, how we're, engaging not only directly with the company, but also, with regulators. It seems like that's going to be a big piece of the puzzle as well, to navigate sort of the costs and, who benefits from the cost savings and all those great, robust conversations. And then secondly, this trust building theme around it, it feels like the environmental justice concerns are extremely real right now, and every decision made by the utility to do something else sort of has implications and is sort of eroding that trust. And so, Kai, I really appreciated your comments too on how to rebuild that, because that's definitely been a part of our dialogue with companies. And that relates to both communities and, John, your comments with workers. And so really would love to see that study, because I think that would be huge for our engagements. Where it's sort of unknown, the reliance on contract workers, where is that reported data? Where is that number? How do we quantify it? We've heard data that it's huge, but frankly, all the data we see from companies is really their direct workforce. And there's a gap there that we need to figure out how to close. So, but thank you all for this great presentation. This panel has been excellent. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Amy, for those words. And yeah, with this, I just wanted to give again thanks to all our panelists, also the people that were able to participate and listen to this essential information and to learn a bit more about such an interesting and compelling technology that I'm pretty sure that we will be talking more about it and doing more with it, talking to engaging with companies and trying to make this transition a fair, equitable, and just one. So that will be. So thank you again, and goodbye to all.
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.